Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom. Welcome to my podcast, where we will go deep into the lair of the purple worm instead of down into the rabbit hole, where we'll voyage into the astral realm of my mind and explore the verse of nerd culture. This is Phantom Thoughts. So in this call-in episode, Phantom feedback if you will. That's terrible. I should not call it that. Anyway, in this episode, I've got calls from Evil Jeff of Minions and Musings, and Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast on Rulings Over Rules, and also some calls from Jason on player skill. So let's get to the calls.
Pink Phantom is Evil Jeff. Just got pointed to your latest podcast in which you invoke my name, so I had to go hear what you were going to say about it. Appreciate your comments on there, and you're right. There is that level of trust that is needed for Rulings Over Rules, and you are correct. Memory is a big part of it. As long as everybody is remembering things and doing so in a very consistent way, then you can have Rulings Over Rules like that. You know, I got to thinking about the whole Rulings Over Rules with college and NFL referees, football, and look at how inconsistent some of these are with some of these particular refs. And let me continue that in a second. Because when you look at the football, especially the most recent thing with college football about targeting, they have gotten to where the interpretation has gone away, the rulings over it, because they have defined targeting rule very succinctly. And if the actions match it, cool. But in, say, basketball, yes, there are rules, but there's a lot more flexibility in there for the ref to adjudicate that. And that's where you see some of these, oh, that was a foul, but then, well, no, not by what my interpretation of it is. And sometimes they say, yeah, it was a foul, even though other people would say it wasn't. So, I think how much we don't trust refs anymore. Good episode, and I look forward to listen to more of your stuff in the future.
Thanks so much for the call. I really appreciate the analogy with referees in sports because, a lot of times we'll refer to game masters as referees. And, that goes back, of course, to the wargaming roots of the game where there was a referee for double-blind war games where you had two sides and they would each tell the referee their actions, and the referee would have to determine within the rule system or within the genre that they were acting, how those actions intermingled and interpret what the results would be when everything was thrown together. And the idea of a referee as a neutral arbiter is, mutual to that style of war game and to sports, because that's what referees are supposed to be. They're supposed to be neutral arbiters of the rules. And I think what we've seen in sports is something that I think is mirrored somewhat in RPGs now that we're in an era and, this kind of online era where people hire folks to referee games, RPGs, sometimes in person, because Jules from NZ podcast has done that sort of thing. And online, I see a lot of, professional DMs, sort of advertising in their profiles on various social media that they are available for hire to do games. And I've seen, various places online where people talk about they do that kind of thing. Maybe it's in an after-school program, or maybe it's for folks who just don't have anyone to GM for them and who don't know much about role-playing games. And in that situation where you have, essentially strangers arbitrating a game, you're going to tend, as sports have tended to over the years, to have more specific rules and to make it so that interpretation is limited because the rule is there. You're not really interpreting the rule so much as you're applying the rule. Okay, this did this, and you did this, and this did this over here. So this is how it works out if you use the rules. You're following A, B, C, D. And sometimes those things are complex. So, of course, the rules have to get very specific. But as they have tried to do with the targeting rule in college football, they have tried to make it as fairly as simple as possible, because in a sport where these athletes are very fast, moving very fast, and there are a lot of them on the field, and it's, as they say, a bang bang play, you have to be able to understand what you're seeing and interpret that through the rules and make a ruling there on the spot. And the evolution of that targeting rule has kind of followed that path, where it started as it was very interpretive, as you said, and then now it's, okay, if you see this, it's probably targeting, throw the flag and take a look at it. And when you look at it that second time, you're looking for this and this, or this and this. So there's a definite process with specific steps and very much defined observations that you need to see for that ruling to take place. But that's and again, as you say, in basketball, what's a flagrant foul? There are definitions within that, but there is sort of a broad range. So what's a flagrant foul for one ref may not be a flagrant foul for another ref. And that leads to, in sports, how much do you trust referees? I mean, let's face it, referees are not very well liked in the world of sports by fans, and a lot of times by players and by coaches. And even though professional referees, overall, they do a very good job for what they have to do, but it's not the way it's seen, because you remember the thing that sticks out is when it's wrong and it affected your team. They made the wrong ruling. It affected your team in a poor way. It cost them your game, or it put them, at odds where they had difficulty winning a game. And, that's what you remember. You remember the things that went against you. And so there's always an outcry. And there's always an urge to further narrow down exactly what the rules are and put them on paper. And you better enforce them this way because that's the rule. And that kind of trust, that goes back to the idea of trust. If you don't trust the person that's GMing your game, then that's going to create a lot of tension in the group. That's going to make being in a role-playing game a lot less fun. And it's probably going to lead to the breakup of some role-playing groups. So I really appreciate everything you brought in those two calls.
Hey, Pink Phantom. Hope all is going well. I hope these messages sound okay. I'm doing them on my phone for the most part. I'm at home on Wi-Fi, so I'm sure that helps. But yeah, I'm curious if these are coming across okay or not. I mean, they sounded okay in the callback episode. So episode 18, the call-in episode, is very good. Thank you for playing those calls and responding to them. I hope Joe found the pizza he was smelling. I don't think Evil Jeff's wrong. And I don't think you're wrong in that if you have a good GM, a good DM, an experienced one, that even though they might not write everything down, they're probably going to be pretty consistent in their rulings. I bet Gygax and Arneson were pretty consistent when similar situations came up. You know what I mean? I think the issue is when you get somebody that's not as experienced, and that's where maybe writing everything down helps quite a bit. Oh, sorry, I should have said that last call. If I didn't say it, that was about rulings over rules. So I should have said that. Anyhow, you're doing a great job. I appreciate it. I actually do appreciate you're not putting out episodes every single day because there are a lot of episodes flying right now. But and I'm partially blamed for that. But yeah, keep up the great work. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, putting out a show every day. Wow, that would be. I mean, The folks that do the Wobblies and Wizards podcast, especially Logar the Barbarian, who's on every episode, and what Rob C is doing for October, those guys are machines. I mean, that's some amazing stuff that they can do that. Of course, I'm always amazed by how much you respond to all these various podcasts, because I hear your call anytime people do a call-in episode. It seems like I hear your voice on that. It's like, wow, Jason's a machine at listening and responding to podcasts. So that's pretty amazing for you. And as far as, rulings over rules, yeah, experience I'm sure helps a lot. I think just comfort with the group would help, and comfort with the material. Because if you know the material and you know the rules you're using, however heavy or light they are, and you know the group you're with, you're comfortable with the group you're with, then I think it is easier to kind of be yourself and trust your knowledge. And if you're going to be yourself, you're going to be consistent, because you're going to be you. You're going to be who you are. And, I talked earlier about how the players would need to have trust in the GM in a rulings over rules OSR setting. But the reverse is also true. The GM needs to have trust and faith in the players, that they have confidence in them. Because if you don't think the players have confidence in you, you're probably not going to be a good GM, because you're going to be nervous. You're going to think you're not doing things correctly, even when you are, and you're going to second guess yourself. So trust works both ways, and a certain knowledge of the rules and the setting and the module or the adventure that you put together is going to help. I think that's why a lot of people like to put together their own adventures and just draw from modules and rolling on tables, because it's kind of like the difference between just reading something and reading it, or just watching something versus taking notes on something. Because it's been shown that, if you're taking notes as you're listening to somebody, you're more likely to remember what they talked about and to understand it better. And so I think that's why a lot of GMs in general, and OSR GMs in particular, prefer to, if not completely create their material, take pre-printed material, go over it, and give it their own spin, their own touch, so that, they know it better. I also think that plays into, the movement we're seeing both within the OSR, or maybe as an adjunct to the OSR, to rules light rule sets. Because if you have a very light set of rules, it's easier to cognitively deal with them and to process them. And so you're more likely to be consistent within those rules. So thanks for your calls.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Jason here. Interesting podcast on player skill. Trying not to sneeze during the recording. I think, though, one thing you brought up that's really interesting is the idea that the characters know so much more about the world and even the room they're in than the players do, right? So you can use all the player skill in the world, and you definitely should. You need to think outside your sheet, but you also need to think creatively about what's on your sheet, like you said, about your equipment and your inventory and all that, and how you can use that creatively. But the DM needs to be aware that the characters see and know things the players don't. You know, mage that in a magic user in a game is going to have knowledge of magical things and be able to recognize things that the players aren't going to even think to ask about, and so that has to be recognized, and that's kind of a tough thing to pull into the game sometimes. I'd like to hear, if you're willing to expand a little bit on that, the idea that, because the characters have knowledge, right? The priest has more knowledge about the undead than the players might, or how they turn them, or they might have more knowledge of exactly what certain things do. You know what I'm saying? Like you said in your show, the characters have not, inherent knowledge of the world, and they have inherent knowledge of the room and the things they're seeing with their eyes, and they're hearing and they're smelling, that the DM might not be telling the players. So how is the DM, can you help players with that character knowledge beyond the, okay, role perception? Because in new games, right, in quote unquote new school games, you just roll skill and the DM feeds you all that. But if we're going to go to the idea of describe, not roll, then how can the DM facilitate use of that character knowledge?
Those are some very good questions. I think from the perspective I'm looking at, this actually dovetails a little bit into something that Joe talked about on his Hindsightless podcast, one of his Hindsightless podcasts recently. We talked about how he preferred world building to be a group effort, and so he didn't mind, character backstories and things because that was part of the group concept of building the world together. And I think it's something that, in terms of whether it's a session, definitive session zero that you have, or just a discussion you have leading up to an RPG campaign, that the people who are going to be involved, players and GM alike, discuss what kind of world they want to be in and what kind of characters they're going to want to kind of play, and that the players can give some feedback to the GM what they want their characters to kind of be like. What does the cleric's worship of his deity or deities deal with? For the magic user, what does arcane magic look like in the setting that their magic user is in? And it's something that the GM has to consider in their own world building. And then in the course of play, then the GM uses that pre-built part of the world and expands on it a little bit on their own, and uses it when they describe details in a room in a way that hopefully triggers specific questions from those characters, that talks about where he may talk about the description of a mysterious cave they're in, and there are idols carved on an altar, and trying to entice the cleric player who they had earlier discussed that idols were part of their deity's pantheon, how their worshippers kind of focused their worship. Do I reckon? Then the cleric's player would be asking, do I recognize any of the idols on the altar? Do I recognize, the structure of the altar or some of the religious symbols or iconology that are used? A magic user character might ask, do I recognize runes? If a DM or GM talks about there are runes inscribed in a magic item or on a table or on the floor, or there's some kind of magical symbols. It's a case of where this is going to draw on the lore of the world that the characters know, and you kind of establish beforehand, and sometimes as you go, maybe what that lore is. And if the GM introduces something new in that's related to that lore, maybe it's just simply a matter of telling them, you come into this room and you see inscribed on the floor a circle with several polyhedral shapes inscribed into it, and then turns to the mage's character and says, you recognize these as being from the divination school of magic that you studied, or you recognize this from a scroll of far seeing that you recently ran across on a visit to a library or to your mentor. So the GM can specifically just tell the characters those things that tell the players the things that their characters know, or they can use kind of pre-set up ideas of what their characters know. And this is one of those cases where character backstory, which is something that's been talked about within the month of October, talking about the OSR, and just in general in our sort of sphere of anchorites, how much backstory is too much, and what's a good backstory, what should be in a backstory for a character, what things should be in it, what things shouldn't be in it. And I think this is one of the ways where the character backstory can be brought into play. So you're playing off what the players already know about the characters. But that is something that is, going to be difficult to do, really, to speak to the players about what the characters know. And sometimes it will simply have to be just very direct. Your character knows what this is or has seen something similar. And maybe that will entice them to examine it more closely so that the GM can feed them more details, or maybe that will entice the character to speculate about what it is and give the GM an idea on the spot. Because I know I've seen that in a lot of GM advice is, if the player expresses something in a way that it says their character knows it, and it's not going to directly contradict something that already exists in your world, go with it. So this is really a part where the give and take between player and game master is really important, and that's kind of the heart of role playing, right? That's people talking to each other and discussing this fictional world that the characters are adventuring in. And I think that's how you do it. It's a give and a take. And that's going to do it for another episode of Phantom Thoughts. If you have any feedback you'd like to leave, you can contact me by leaving a voice message at anchor.fm/the-pink-phantom, or you can send an email to thepinkphantom1@gmail.com, or you can contact me on Twitter @thepinkphantom. The music in this episode was Strength of the Titans and Late Night Radio by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license from creativecommons.org/licenses/by/4.0.